So I want to pick up this notion again that each person is a genius at being themselves. Part of the genius of the person is whatever gifts, talents, and abilities they have. But another part of it is their natural style, their way of being funny, their way of being smart, their way of being passionate, their way of being peaceful. Whatever that is their way of being is part of their genius. So genius connects us to gifts we have to give, but on the other side, it connects us to the very being of ourselves. Genius is an aspect of the soul, and the soul is really the ground of our being. So genius is partly the giftedness and the capacity for groundedness right inside ourselves. And again, I'm trying to argue in a world that's very chaotic and disturbing that the groundedness, the centeredness, and even the richness of a person is found within. We may have to go far out into the world and brush ourselves up against life and up against death in order to fully awaken this genius. But the thing we're trying to locate, the thing we're trying to become more conscious of, and the thing that we came to the world to give is the spirit of genius that is already in us. So a person can become a genius at being themselves. And in the long run, that's the only real thing to do. Or as Oscar Wilde said, be yourself, because everyone else is taken. Something calls to us. Usually the calling comes in youth. That's the first time it comes. And a person goes from the world of childhood into being called into a greater world, not just the world of facts and figures, which can be introduced through regular schooling, but this greater world of imagination, of spirituality. I don't mean spirituality in terms of religion. I mean an awakened spirit in a person that causes them to be fully alive. So that is waiting to awaken. That's what calling was about. But it's not well known that what was being called upon, what was being called to, what was trying to be evoked was the genius already in a person. And I'll go back to this notion of young people. If young people don't know that they came to the world with something in them, an essence, a being, a spirit, and that they came to give something, and they have something to give, and that they came with a purpose that's trying to unfold, they become much easily available for the two big kind of life-defeating things, that is to say, depression and despair on one side, and violence and even terrorism on the other. You watch how it's the particularly young men, but young people who are pulled into these things like terrorism. One reason is because they're told that they have nothing in themselves, and therefore they could be filled with anything. The same thing happens often in affluent situations where young people suddenly take their own lives. One reason they take their life is because they didn't know that their life was already purposeful, it had meaning. They were told that they had to become someone. They didn't know that they already are someone, which is one of the first things that culture is supposed to teach young people, that you are someone. You came to this world with meaning embedded in you, and you came here to give and to do something, and culture was supposed to awaken that and support that. And right now, that's not happening too often. And so we're calling the attempt to reawaken culture to the nature of individual genius, the Genius Project. So the genius first awakens in youth. That's the classic story. But there's another level to it. The genius is youthful. In other words, the genius in a person does not age. The person ages, but the genius stays on the fresh edge of inspiration and imagination. So remember all those stories about people trying to find the fountain of youth. You know, Ponce de Leon went all the way from Europe to Florida, and people went all over the world looking. They only made one small mistake. They thought the fountain of youth was outside. And it turns out it's inside everybody. And the fountain of youth is another reference to the idea of an inborn genius that is ever producing something. It's one's connection to the rebirth quality of the world, to the renewal energy of nature, as well as to the depth of imagination, which is the natural inheritance of every person. And so genius is connected to the inner nature of a person, and that's connected to the eternal nature of life. And so when a person is in touch with the genius, they are more able to renew their life, and they can, in a certain sense, tap into the fountain of youth. If you imagine that fountain as the free-flowing waters of life and the waters of imagination, which are, kind of found in the soul of the person, but which come out in unique ways through the genius of the individual. Now, this is really important for youth, obviously. Imagine if each young person was approached as a budding genius who had the capacity to bring meaning into the moment and beauty into the enrichment of life. But it has another great function too, especially now. More people are living older now, generally speaking. And so what happens is people begin to feel old unless they have contact with this inner fountain of genius, or this flowing of youth from within. That is to say, one of the things that can happen to a person as they get older is they can hear the calling again. The calling doesn't stop just because a person becomes older. The calling is to the essence of the person, and therefore it continues throughout life. And so those people who may be thinking or told they should retire are also in the position to refire in the terms of find the deeper inspiration that maybe they didn't live out when they were younger, but that becomes possible later. And then there's another value to this whole thing. In the midst of the turmoil of the world and all the uncertainties, if more of the older people were connected to an awakened sense of their own genius, which would give them purpose all the way to the end of life, they become the kind of instinctive genius to genius mentors to the young people who, in the midst of all the turbulence, are trying to find their way into the world. And then the awakened elders would be those who are getting close to leaving the world, but who have an awareness and a capacity to help the young people find more thoroughly the paths of genius and the paths of meaning. And so this sense of genius, this sense of a genius project, is to awaken genius at all ages and stages of life, but also to create a genius-based conversation between those who are young and looking for the meaning of life and those who are old enough to have found something about it. And that's another way to find the fountain of youth, imagination, and vitality waiting to kind of flow freely from the soul. So on the outside, it's felt as calling, and on the inside, it's felt as the awakening of one's own way of seeing and being in the world. It's hard to just prove it, but when a person experiences, when they see the world through their own real eyes, when they feel the presence of life in a full way, everything begins to change. And in a sense, a path opens. I call it the path of genius, that thing which has been calling us all along. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying in a confusing world, it becomes almost necessary. And I'm also saying as long as we're close to that path, as long as we're breathing in some kind of harmony or some kind of resonance with this inner spirit, that we are more resilient, less easily defeated, less available for depression and despair, which are increasingly aspects of, the contemporary world. I think the world is in so much danger that everybody needs to be considered as a subject of calling.